Yeah, this is
Welcome to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast.
supercharged by Amped Outdoors Lithium.
Catch more fish. Learn tips,
Tricks,
techniques, secrets, and decades of angler's wisdom. Welcome to the show.
guys. Oh, there we go. Trying to figure out how to get rid of that. How's everybody doing? Welcome back to the Angler's Wisdom Podcast. How's the audio sound? Everything sound okay? I have Michael Durkalec backstage, and he will be joining us here in a second. I made some change to the studio, so I'm just kind of dialing those things in. But I have a pretty exciting show for you. There we go. And get the comments up. Put that over here. Anyways, all right. So let me go ahead and pull my notes up, and we will bring Mike on. If you don't know Mike, why is there echo? If you don't know Mike, he is the local Cleveland Metroparks fish biologist. Let's bring that up to the screen. All right, imperfect action, guys. That's how you get it done. But we'll have a nice, perfect, well, semi-perfect polished show at some point. All right. All right, let's bring Mike on.
Hey, great to be back, Chuck. And for what it's worth, I don't hear any echo from your voice on my end, and I assume the other viewers don't.
Cool. Awesome. I think I got it dialed in, so we should be good to go. So how you been, Mike?
Good. Like everybody else, experiencing our first blast of winter and wondering how that's going to affect our local fishing opportunities and all that fun stuff. But we'll get into that, I'm sure, in our conversation.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering. I have a steelhead trip booked for tomorrow, and I was looking at the water temperature on the Rocky River, and it's looking like it's pretty close to being frozen. So after the show, I'm going to run down there and check it out. But hopefully it's not slushed over, and I can get him out there, get him on some steelhead. He's actually coming in from New Jersey.
Oh, wow. Yeah, for what it's worth, the river up a little further is very fishable today. But yeah, I know where you like the kayak is the most sluggish water down by the marina, and that's the first area to freeze up. Relief is on the way this weekend, so if you got any weekend trips planned, it's looking a lot milder.
Oh yeah.
Assuming we
Yeah,
can believe the weather people.
right. It's nice to see that it's going to warm up. I was actually talking to Ross Robertson yesterday about ice fishing opportunities up by the islands. Um,
Okay.
because I know that's somewhat of a unpredictable thing. So I was just trying to figure out what's the process when somebody wants to book a trip. Do
Mhm.
they reach out in the summertime, get on the list, or is it like when that ice comes, you need to get on the phone and be there now? Um,
Yeah, good question. I guess if you book in summer, you can always cancel if there's not ice. But yeah, unpredictable would be an understatement. Lake Erie ice fishing's just less than unpredictable. It's the exception anymore, not the norm.
right. Yeah, I figured, at least if they get on the list, and just say, hey, I want to ice fish this winter. Let me
Mhm.
know when we get good ice. That way, maybe he's got like 5 or 6 people to call and they automatically have a spot, versus
Mhm.
like kind of the lottery, luck of the draw.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
All right. All right. So, um, hopefully that's all right. Trying to get this audio. So a couple things about Michael Durkalec. He works for the Cleveland Metroparks as the local fisheries biologist. Primarily handles Cuyahoga County, but also assists in many other places. At the end of the day, with Mike, if it has to do with protecting, saving, building, nurturing, anything like that to do with the fishery or the environment, Mike is in. So he's a great guy to have locally, and a great protector of our paradise. He's also a very highly skilled angler, and not just one species. Mike's like me. He kind of jumps from species to species and takes certain techniques from, maybe fishing for muskie or fishing for perch, and adapts them over, and just, loves the chase. So any multi-species questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. He's also a wild forager. So when the morels,
Mhm.
you say it?
Yep. Morel mushrooms.
Yeah, when those come in, Mike's always loaded up with them, and he's very knowledgeable with that as well. So, where do you want to get started, Mike? Is there
Yeah, well,
anything
I'll
that
I'll I'll try. I hope I can half live up to your introduction. Thank you, Chuck. And yeah, I feel like I'm in a privileged position. I started as somebody who just enjoyed being outdoors and fishing, and that kind of evolved into my education and career as a fish biologist. So, even though I'm a biologist here at the park, first and foremost, I come to things from an angler's perspective. So I guess I arrived at conservation through angling, like a lot of people. And a lot of hunters have a similar experience. So, but yeah, I like you said, I appreciate multi-species diversity, the challenge, looking at parallels, things that can be pulled from one and applied to another, and vice versa. So, yeah, we got a lot we can talk about.
that's pretty awesome. When did you start fishing, Mike?
I was about 4 years old. Sounds kind of funny because where I work now, and I sometimes feel like it sounds a little cheesy when I say this, but I've come full circle because I caught my first fish in Cleveland Metroparks, Hinkley Lake. I had two brothers a year younger than me. They were twins. I bring that up because my dad would run a small rowboat at Hinkley Lake while we were having a family picnic. And, three little boys were a little too much to have in a boat at once. So one of us would go out fishing with dad while the other two were up on shore doing the cookout with mom, and we would take turns. But I still remember catching those bluegill then. And, it's funny how many fish I've caught since then, but the memory of pulling in bluegill, probably 6-inch, 7-inch bluegill that felt like they weighed a ton to a little kid, it stuck with me and was definitely helped mold my early beginnings in the sport. And if you don't start with bluegill, you're doing something wrong, because you got to start with bluegill. I see that meme that goes around, the joke that shows a bluegill and says the gateway drug. Yeah, definitely the gateway drug to the fishing addiction for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it always starts with the bluegill. I started, I think I was 5 or 6, and first time fishing. It was a birthday party at the park. Ended up catching 43 bluegill, I think.
Oh, nice.
Oh, no,
yeah. If you give me a choice between steelhead fishing or going to a pond where we can catch 9-inch bluegill on a fly rod, I'll take the latter every time. So it's not just for kids; it's fun for adults too.
Yeah, I really enjoy. One second.
Kind of a cool effect, Chuck. Kind of like, and the growing pains are understandable. Chuck just changed up platform services very recently, so
there we go.
Cool.
I tried to turn on. I have a light, and I tried to turn it on. It kicked off the MacBook Pro, so I lost my audio.
You're going too high tech, brother. I got my laptop here with well, I'm not running the show either, so I got the easy job.
Yeah, that's the stuff.
Well, once you dial it all in, it's going to be polished and professional. But yeah, a few learning pains, growing pains.
Oh yeah, and it gives you an opportunity to learn something new.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, so the first thing, see if we got any comments. Robert Sharkey's actually up by Detroit River in Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Says he had to bust through twice. Of
it's
course,
probably not going to be the last of it, but yeah, I think it's here for a little bit, going to be gone, and then I don't know. I think ice fishing's on our agenda for today to talk about, so I won't jump ahead. But I'm kind of hoping it comes and stays at some point. Near term, it's going to get warm again, but definitely separates the serious anglers from the weekend ones, though. So I can tell you, Robert is not a passing angler. He's pretty serious if he did that.
Oh yeah, and he's out there with a dry suit and all the proper safety gear. But at the end of the day, just get out there, do it safely, and enjoy life, because we never know when our time's up. So
well, and I appreciate you always you focus on some of the sometimes, I guess, super important but less glamorous parts of the sport, like this ice safety, and we'll talk about some good housekeeping things to not spread invasive species. So I appreciate you using your platform to be responsible in those regards. Zach looks like he asked, what's my favorite fish to go after? That's evolved over time. So you asked me 10 years ago, it would have been different. 10 years before that, it'd be different. Right now, and anyone who's my social media friend probably realizes I really got the musky bug. I appreciate the challenge. I always say people see your big, oh, there we go. Chuck's ready. That was a big fish caught on 4th of July weekend on Lake St. Clair casting. That's about 2 hours from Cleveland, and it's pretty kayak friendly if you pick the right day. So for the kayak angler listeners here today, but folks that know me on social media, I always say that you see the highlight reel. I don't post a day when I don't catch anything because there's nothing to post. So I get skunked musky fishing too. If you don't, you're the only person on earth who pursues them that doesn't ever get skunked. So it makes the reward that much better. So yes, musky would be my current answer. Although on a given day, I can appreciate fishing for anything.
Oh yeah, you could even get skunked fishing for bluegill. I mean, it's rare, but You know, sometimes the fish just don't want to cooperate. And if you think about it, how boring would it be if we just had amazing days every time? It would get boring.
I couldn't agree more. You need the ups and downs to appreciate the good days. So, and I always say,
Yeah.
if I go out on a whim and and don't catch anything, I don't regret it, because the biggest muskie I caught this whole year, which was my biggest Ohio muskie period, was a day I almost stayed in bed that morning. It was like alarm went off. I'm like, and I'm like, I don't want to regret not going. I went, and I couldn't be happier I did. So yeah, the good days and the bad days, you need them both to put it in perspective.
Oh yeah.
And
It's
you're still outside on the water. How's that a bad day, right? You may see an osprey diving for a fish. You may just see something else cool on the water. You might meet a cool fellow angler. So it's never a wasted day out there, even if you don't catch a fish.
nope. Just being by the water, on the water, there's a healing aspect. It takes your stress away. It makes you kind of forget about the busy lives that we all have, and just kind of takes you back. And the best part about it for me is I always meet so many great people close to the water, whether it's by the river, on the boat ramp, on the water, even on Lake St. Clair. I what was it, June, I think, when we were down there for the Hobie Worlds event. uh, I'm out there in the middle of the lake fishing. Maybe there's two or three other boats around, and this one guy just starts coming towards me, respectfully slows down, plenty of room, and just kind of coasts up to me. But I'm like, what's this guy coming up for? But he was blown away by the rig, never seen anything like that. So he just wanted to kind of pull up and have a conversation. Most of the people
Yeah.
out there are friendly.
For folks that haven't seen your kayak setup, yeah, it is a sight to behold. There's not a square inch of that thing that doesn't have some purpose. It's pretty cool. Probably costs as much as my boat too. My boat.
Trying to think what kind of boat you got.
I got a Lund, just a aluminum 16.5-foot Lund angler, a full console. There's no perfect boat for every situation, but those of us who aren't rich, which is pretty much all anglers, right? You just kind of got to find the best fit for the widest variety of fishing opportunities, and it works for me. Fits in the garage nicely to dry out and rig between trips. I can fish inland waters. I can fish bigger rivers. I can go out in Lake Erie or Lake St. Clair when I pick the days. So,
Yeah, it's like one of my industry buddies told me 2019 probably. He said, kayaks are like golf clubs. You don't go to the golf course with a putter to play 9 holes. You got to take your whole bag. And the same thing goes with boats. There's certain boats that are going to perform better in certain environments, and it depends on the angler. It's how do you like to fish? Where do you like to fish? What do you want? And you just pick the kayak or boat that's designed for that.
well, and one bit of advice, I don't know if this would extend to your advice on kayaks as well. And I get, in my position, I get a fair number of people ask me fishing boat advice as well. My first several boats were not new. I bought used boats. They weren't exactly what I would have ordered if I ordered a new boat, but I retrofitted them to fit what I wanted, whatever. After over 10 years of having used boats, it helped me really dial in my preference as an angler and what works for me and what, I use more than other features, that kind of thing. And then when I finally bit the bullet on a new boat, which, as you know, kayak or boat, it doesn't matter. They're not cheap. I knew pretty much exactly what I wanted instead of having a lot of guesswork in it. So I actually think starting out with used boats is smart. unless you're just independently wealthy, and then saves you a lot of money in the end getting the boat that really is the right fit for you. Drama Outdoors said something about great job on that Garfield pond restoration. That was a pond almost 100 years old that Cleveland Metroparks restored in Garfield Reservation. It's going to be a nice fishing pond, and we couldn't be happier with how it turned out. There's a center there that we're going to do teaching kayaking and fishing out of. Aesthetically, it just fits in the landscape there so nicely. So if any of you are out on the Garfield Heights general area, stop by on a weekend on your lunch break. It's even just a nice place to take a walk. And he also asked if there's any chance we'll stock trout in there. Not yet. It may be on the horizon. I can't say for sure, but we're working our way up the food chain because it is a newly restored pond. We need to let the macroinvertebrates and food chain base kind of establish. So right now it's mostly sunfish. We'll eventually add some largemouth bass and channel catfish, and trout could be a possibility.
Nice. All right. Sorry about that. So one thing I'm really excited to talk about is number one, the comeback story of the Cuyahoga River. And I know you had a big part in that. And early this spring, for the first time ever, we stocked steelhead in the Cuyahoga River. And then about a month, maybe a little bit longer ago, we stocked sturgeon. So
yeah,
what can you tell me about that?
Super exciting. And when you say I had a big part, no, I had a small part along with a million other partners. Part of the reason the Cuyahoga River's come so far is because of partnerships, the public, agencies, people that care. So that's where it's a really cool example as well. But the Cuyahoga River was the embarrassment not only of the Cleveland area, but probably of the country in the late 60s and early 70s. We've all heard about the fires. It's part of why Cleveland was the butt of jokes. It was not a good example of how you treat a river. But at the time, in that time in our industrial evolution as a country, that just was the accepted way to do it. It was a turning point, though. After the river had caught on fire more than once, it was the impetus behind the Clean Water Act in 1971. And if you look at where the river is now versus then, it's unbelievable. What some of the most successful environmental legislation in the planet's history. But we went from flatlining, essentially, the river just being full of pollution tolerant species, a lot non-native like common carp, to a robust fish community that's growing, as you mentioned, with things like the state endangered lake sturgeon just stocked there. So another big part of the recovery, in addition to the cleaning it up from industrial pollution due to regulation and enforcement, is dam removal. And that's been a more recent effort. At least 4 dams have been removed from the Cuyahoga River in recent decades. One of the most notable being the Brecksville Diversion Dam, where Route 82, the high bridge, crosses the river in 2020. That essentially left 200 miles of the lower river being free flowing for the first time, in 200 years. And then kind of one of the last pieces of that puzzle on the horizon is the Gorge Dam, which is slated to be removed in 2026. So yeah, just been a patchwork of efforts and hurdle after hurdle, but we're finally bearing the fruits of that. And it's a beautiful river to go on a bike ride along, to kayak, or to fish. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's heavily trafficked. There's big freighters going up and down. There is an app that you can get. I believe it's Marine Traffic Live. So if you are planning a kayak fishing trip or a kayak trip down the Cuyahoga River, you can use that app to see when the ships are scheduled and just make sure you're out of the way. And the most important thing is to share the river. And my buddy Jim Ridge, founder of Share the River, he does a lot of things to make sure, like just the little people like us the recreational people. We're getting along with, the giant freighters. They're out there working, and everybody just utilizes the resource safely and happily.
Yeah. And that's cool. That's a resource I was unaware of. But yeah, the freighters, that would be in the shipping channel. That's just the several miles of the river closest to Lake Erie, which is popular with kayakers, stand-up paddleboarders, all kinds of people. But there's lots of river upstream to you can float and fish as well. I would say there's a Cuyahoga River Waters Trail website. One of the most common questions I just get is where can I put in and take out? So that's important. And then as far as dangers, it's a big, fast-flowing river for northern Ohio when if compared to the Rocky or Chagrin. So things like strainers, like do a little, if you're not already an experienced kayaker, make sure you know what a strainer is and where they set up in rivers, because that's probably the most dangerous thing you may run into there. It's just a down tree and a river bend that can catch your boat if you're not prepared to go around it. But yeah, really neat. As you noted, steelhead were just stocked in the river officially for the first time this past spring. 60,000 juvenile fish, as I recall, and the plan is to continue doing that. So doesn't mean there wasn't steelhead coming up the river anyways. There's plenty of stray fish that came up previous to that from stockings in other rivers, but that'll continue to make the river a more and more viable steelhead fishery. You can expect by this fall, I mean, you should have already had juvenile steelhead at that skipper or jack size, and we should have some of the first adult steelhead coming back next year. But the sturgeon, those have me even more excited. They're not being put in to foster a sport fishery, but it doesn't mean anglers won't catch them occasionally. But this year, this past October was the first time ever that the state endangered species was stocked in the river. Again, a multi-agency effort led by the Ohio Division of Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that we were certainly involved with. In fact, one of the three release sites was at Merwin's Wharf on the Cuyahoga River, which is a Metroparks property. But it was only 60 juvenile sturgeon this year, 20 each at 3 different locations. They do have transmitters. The idea is to see which ones had the best survival. That'll better inform stocking locations next October when we plan to put a lot more of those little fish in. I think it's off the top of my head, it was 20,000. And then after that, the plan is to stock them for 20 years in a row to establish a population again that after that 20 years, the hope is if the river has recovered as much as we believe it has, these fish will be self-sustaining and won't require stocking. So yeah, super interesting. And, 100 years from now, the Mike and Chuck of the future may be talking about someone seeing a 6-foot sturgeon in the Cuyahoga River, but they're long-lived and slow-growing, so that's a way off. But yeah, definitely an exciting time.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. You mentioned the stocking wasn't for the sports fishing, so there was a biological reason?
Well, yeah, just to enhance the ecological diversity of the river. If you go back far enough, sturgeon were in the Cuyahoga River. In fact, they should have been in there spawning, living largely in Lake Erie, and then coming up into the rivers in the river in the spring to spawn. So it's just another step in bringing the river back to its past glory, and adding another spoke back to that ecological wheel. I'm stealing that analogy from Aldo Leopold, the father of modern conservation. I'm coining the word, but he described the ecosystem like a wheel with spokes, and even if you don't understand what each individual spoke does, you remove enough of those spokes, you're going to compromise the wheel. So think of sturgeon as just another spoke being added back that play their unique role in the ecosystem, as addition to being super cool. I mean, imagine just going down and seeing a couple of 6-foot long sturgeons spawning in the shallows. I mean, that'd be a heck of an experience I'd love to have.
Oh, yeah. And I might be wrong, but did I read that the sturgeon really enjoy zebra mussels?
Yeah, they're omnivorous, so they're pretty diverse in what they'll eat. But yes, they'll eat zebra mussels. I'm glad you brought that up. Gobies, so that's 2 non-native species that sturgeon apparently have a bit of a sweet tooth for. But they'll eat vegetation, they'll eat fish, dead and alive. They eat crustaceans, invertebrates, wide variety of food. They're pretty flexible.
Interesting. You know, when I went to Gibraltar Island to Stone Labs for the tour,
Okay.
during the warm season, they have tours. I think it's every Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I learned was the northern water snake, you know, they were almost extinct. But it was the goby that really helped bring them back.
That would be the Lake Erie water snake subspecies of the northern water snake. But yeah, pretty cool. And yeah, that's a neat place. Between my undergrad and graduate period, I lived on an island for 15 weeks. So have some great memories, and it's a great place to study. In fact, you brought up zebra mussels. One of my projects as an undergraduate, going all the way back to the early 90s, was doing a study on a particular aspect of zebra mussel colonization, which was very early in their, when they got into this area. So, but yep.
Interesting. So just keep that in mind next time you see one of the Lake Erie water snakes. They are very beneficial to the fishery. So just let them be. Don't kill them. You know, they're just as important as everything else. So the Cuyahoga River, interesting thing about that, we now has some natural reproduction steelhead in undisclosed location, but that's a rarity for us.
It's relative. I wouldn't say rare. It's not the norm. Normally where our steelhead reproduce successfully, because the vast majority of them that you're catching have been planted by the state DNR, either here or elsewhere, and they've strayed in, and then you're catching the grown-up fish. But in some cases, the adult fish spawn successfully and create little trout. That typically occurs not in the main rivers. The fish may try spawning in the main rivers, but generally our streams, just geologically, have a little too much silt and the eggs don't do well. Where they're usually successful is in the smaller tributaries of the bigger rivers. So yeah, in fact, there's no less than 7 tributaries of the Cuyahoga River that I know about where there's been documented natural reproduction of steelhead. And again, this is before they were even stocked. It's been happening for years. One of those tributaries in particular, which is in Cleveland Metroparks, it's some of the highest natural reproduction of steelhead, not just in the Cuyahoga River, but in any stream I know of in the state. It's very consistent, and it's pretty neat to see. I mean, they're not native, so as a biologist and an angler, I'm on that fence's edge between. I understand the benefits of steelhead, but also I appreciate native fish, including darters and minnows and the non-game species. The good news is in that particular stream, the native fish are still doing great. I'd use EPA protocols to assess the health of the fish community, native fish community, and they're coexisting. So that's nice to see. But that's yet another indication of how far the rivers come, because trout of any kind need cold, clean water to spawn successfully, and we have several tributaries where it's occurring.
That's pretty awesome. You know, it's so great to see that come back. And it's only been, 60 years?
Yeah, it's about 50, 60 years. Yeah, it just shows, to steal Jurassic Park line, nature finds a way. You remove the stressors, and in some cases, doesn't mean it's always going to heal itself. But if you give it a chance, nature half a chance, an ecosystem, in a lot of cases, it can bounce back surprisingly well. The helping hand of well-meaning and well-informed humans is a big help as well in that. But that's the river's proved its resiliency over these last 60 years.
That's pretty awesome, and a lot of it goes to just people taking care of it.
Well,
companies
and we're not even,
dumping. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We just touched on some of the stocked fish, but I mean the river's got, native, I'm sorry, resident and lake run smallmouth bass that come up in the spring and live there all year. There are 40-pound flathead catfish in the Cuyahoga River. There's tons of channel catfish. There's a robust fish community beyond the steelhead and the sturgeon that'll be in there. So they're just kind of like the icing on the cake.
I didn't realize we had flathead in the
Yeah,
Cuyahoga.
we do. Yeah, a pretty good population actually.
Is that like upper Cuyahoga or down by the
They're
city?
pretty widespread, and they'll spread even more without these dams. But I'd say if you want to target them, I'd say deeper holes with woody structure in the 10 miles of the river closer to Lake Erie. Not necessarily the shipping channel, but up above that where it becomes more riverine with riffles, pools. The deeper pools with woody structure. Yeah, there's some big flatheads.
And you're probably just taking half a shad and just
Yeah, actually, that I'm glad you brought that up. That is usually how you'd fish for most catfish, like channel catfish and blue catfish. They'll eat a live bait fish, but they're scavengers. They'll happily eat dead fish. Um, Flatheads they're like the exception for our local catfish. They're more like a piscivore that's looking for a live meal. So people that are serious about flathead fishing, without exception, use big live bluegills, big live bullhead catfish. So live fish are definitely in your favor. Makes it tougher to target them because that's a whole nother layer of preparation you need to do. But that's part of the rewards of fishing again is preparing properly, putting in the work and gaining the reward. But yeah, flathead's like a live bait fish.
yeah, and that's something I've always enjoyed. When you start at the bottom of the food chain and you go source your own bait, whether it's finding night crawlers or cast net or catching some bluegill or something like that, and then you take it out and just work up the food chain. It's
You struck a chord again in my past. I talked about catching bluegills when I was 4 and 5 years old. We would go out after a rain on the lawn, which was not treated with excessive fertilizer or herbicides, in our backyard, and with a flashlight, and it was good memories catching a bucket full of night crawlers for bait the next day or for a camping trip. So, every youngster should have that opportunity, or if you didn't have it as a youngster, you should have that opportunity as an adult. It's all part of the richness of this sport, and it's not just about going out and catching that fish. It's about all the other stuff that goes into it, at least for a lot of us.
absolutely. Yeah, Robert was actually, what was it, 2 years ago, I think, Robert? He was out wintertime, didn't have a dry suit, was just layered up in winter clothes, went to take a picture or a video of one of the freighters out there, and that freighter flipped him over.
Oh
And
my.
with all those layers, even with the life jacket, he could barely keep his head above water.
Yeah.
And kayak, there was a hatch open, so that flooded. But fortunately, he, had the drive, made it back, and ordered a dry suit a few hours later after we chatted. But it's definitely
Well,
something to watch out for.
I'm glad Robert lived through that to learn from the experience. But yeah, you haven't been an outdoorsman long enough if you haven't had at least one scary experience. So hopefully you learned from it, and he
Yep,
did.
1000%. All right, so before we move off, I want to talk about clean, drain, dry.
Mm-hmm.
That goes hand in hand with everything that everybody else is doing to protect the fishery.
Mm-hmm. Just
When you're
happen to have that in my office. Look at that. You can keep
nice,
talking. I'll just leave that up there.
the most important thing is a lot of us, we fish different places. So when you pull your boat out or your kayak, or even your wading boots, just be conscious of that. What's along for the ride. What I like to do, when I'm switching from Lake Erie to somewhere else or vice versa, I'll pull the kayak out and make I believe it's a 4% bleach solution. Mix it up. I'll spray the kayak down, scrub it down real quick. Just make sure that all that stuff is killed. So I'm not transferring anything to or from any fishery, and even if I'm on the Great Lakes, just because it's connected doesn't mean that I should take a so-called invasive species from one body of water to another with the thought process of thinking that it's going to get there anyways. There's no reason to rush it, right? I'll drop a link to a good video that'll kind of walk you through that as well.
Yeah, great message, Chuck. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. A zebra mussel or quagga mussel, its larval stage is called a veliger. It's planktonic, and you can't barely see it with the naked eye. And that could just be in your bilge water or water in a bait bucket. So there's a few we fortunately don't have in our area yet, but have wreaked havoc elsewhere. The New Zealand mud snail and a nasty algae affectionately dubbed rock snot, Didymo. Those apparently get spread just from the felt of anglers' wading boots. So the bare minimum you can do, and this is good housekeeping, just keeping your vehicle or your garage clean, is get the mud off, get any aquatic vegetation off. The axle of your boat trailer or kayak trailer is a big vector of spreading, moving around aquatic vegetation. Clean that stuff off. You'll have less mess at home. And then Chuck, if you really want to go above and beyond, as he noted, a 2% bleach solution. That's what we use between soak between our sites for the park for our field work. And then the drain, obviously your bait buckets, your bilge, that kind of thing. And then finally the dry. It is recommended a minimum of 5 days if possible. Oh, there we go. Yep. It does look like rock snot, doesn't it, Chuck? The picture you just brought up. I've seen it. This stuff, it really is it looks like mucus covering the rocks, and it just suffocates the whole stream. And this stuff ends up in like trout streams, beautiful environments with nice clean rocks. And, within a few years, every inch of the bottom's covered with slimy looking, just what you just saw there. So, it's one where, it's the right thing to do, but it's also self-serving. If you like fishing and recreating in the outdoors, you don't want to be doing it in the rock snot you just saw or cutting your feet on zebra mussels. Just take a little extra effort, make it a habit, and, you can be part of the solution. So, and certainly appreciate all the anglers that do that kind of thing.
Yeah. And, it's very realistic if you think about it. Your felt pads on your wading boots, all it takes is just a tiny, tiny little microorganism, probably microscopic. You don't even know it's there. So, just what do you say, Mike? An ounce of prevention is worth 1,000,000 pounds of the solution.
Yeah. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But yeah, I'd say I'd change it to 1,000,000 pounds of cure, because once these non-native species are out of the bag, there's really no putting them back in. It's just about doing damage control. So where you can have the impact is at the very beginning stage. So encourage people to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Chuck, does this weather have you thinking about ice fishing?
It has me thinking about that.
No, Chuck, he asked for a few photos to kind of promote the show. That was my wife, Elizabeth, and I. We were in Wisconsin ice fishing a few years ago. And it is a funny story because that's a hen steelhead on the bottom I'm holding, and she's holding a big buck steelhead. And we did catch those ice fishing. We were in the shanty jigging, but we had what are called jaw jackers. They're just basically an automatic hook setting device, like a tip up, or all around the maximum amount we could have around us, which was like 2 jaw jackers for each of us. So 4 of those around the shanty, and then 2 rods in the shanty jigging. And we were sitting side by side. And this was her first year, like even steelhead fishing. She grew up, on a rowboat fishing with her dad here and there, but she had caught her first steelhead ever only about a month and a half, 2 months before that. So that giant you saw there was her third steelhead ever, and it was like 34 inches or something. But the way this went down was we were sitting side by side in the shanty, and her little ice float, even though those are big fish, they sometimes hit really lightly. And we had little tiny, dime-sized spawn bags under a tiny little ice float. And her float just dimpled the surface. That's all it did. And I said, you just missed the hit. She didn't even probably really recognize what happened because, again, inexperience, and it was a really light hit. But before I could get the words out of my mouth, in my hole, only a foot and a half away, my float did that, and I set the hook, and I hooked what you saw there, that big hen. I knew I had a nice fish on, so I got a few looks at it in that clear water, and I'm fighting it. And all of a sudden, we hear the nearest jawjacker pop off, and I'm like, oh, darn it. I thought, I was sure that my fish, because it's even the direction it was swimming, got tangled in the line and triggered it. Right. So it was Elizabeth and our friend Bruce from Chicago was with us. I said, why don't you go out there? I said, Bruce will give you some advice because, again, her inexperience at the time. She can handle herself just fine now. But I said, he'll guide you, but give me slack when I need it and all that. But we'll get this. I'll land this fish and we'll get this untangled. And it was about 5 more minutes in that I'm watching, and I'm like, her fish is not doing the same thing as my fish. She had a different fish. Here's the crazy thing. Me, Mr. Steelhead guy, I've been doing it for 30 years at that time. I hooked my fish before her. She went out. She hooked that fish. She fought it. It was an inch bigger than mine and landed it before I even landed mine. It was just crazy. And it was a really cool memory and a cool experience. Got that photo with both fish, and we released them both after. So Wisconsin's got a pretty cool ice fishery. That's a Lake Michigan harbor up there. And we're actually more targeting big, giant lake run brown trout, but obviously you get other cool stuff in the mix. Oh yeah, there's a big Ontario brook trout.
So before we move off this picture, if you look at the one on the bottom, the way to tell between the female and the male is your female has more of a rounded nose to it. Your males are going to kind of come to more of a point, and then eventually they'll start to get a little bit of a hook there, right, Mike?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out. That's good information. Yep. And sometimes the males have, not always, but they generally get a little more color than the females. That's a big ocean going British Columbia. That's a 40-inch steelhead. And that's a buck, as Chuck just noted, pointed face. And I noted the more colorful pattern. But yeah, that was caught drifting a spoon in the Kispiox River. But yeah, you don't have to drive to Wisconsin to ice fish some years. So I don't know. Are you an ice fisher, Chuck? I am. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Only when I have to be. I mean, you can't not fish, right?
That's how I started out, as funny as it is. Like, as an ice fisher, it was because it's the only thing going on. And it does kind of draw you in. It's its own unique experience. My wife gets cold very easily, and she loves ice fishing because, as you saw, we have a shanty with a buddy heater, and we'll cook breakfast. And it's a cool experience. I mean, you don't have to do all that stuff, but if you want a really rich ice fishing experience, that's part of it. So, but yeah, we get the rule of thumb is 4 inches of quality ice, meaning not slushy, refrozen stuff. If it's relatively clear, solid, and 4 inches or more, that's when it's considered safe to walk on. Some people will go out on 3 inches of solid ice. I don't recommend it. I've never fallen through the ice, and I don't want to. Speaking of safe, you do a lot with kayak safety. Some of the same stuff can apply to ice fishing safety. We won't get into how to get yourself off the ice if you do fall through, but I will only leave you with one thing. Get a pair of spikes that you can carry around your neck, because that can be an absolute lifesaver. But if you get that 4 inches, you can buy, I have a nice ion, lithium battery auger, which is hundreds of dollars. You don't need that. You can just get a spud bar you might already have in your garage, as long as the ice isn't too thick. Cut a hole. Generally, if a hole is not being used and someone else drilled it, it's fair game. So you can just jump into a hole somebody else has been doing. And it can start out with just the gear you already own, relatively short ice, ultralight rod, that kind of thing. One of the most unusual differences between open water and ice fishing is the length of the rod. I mean, you can use rods from 6, 7 feet. Steelheaders, I use a 13-foot rod for float fishing. Most of my ice fishing rods are between 28 and 36 inches. So why do you know why ice fishing rods are shorter, Chuck?
I don't. If I had to guess, I would say so you could stay closer to the hole.
I only put you on a spot because I knew even as a non-ice fisher, that's absolutely right. And you don't have to cast, right? So
Right.
close to the hole where you can see what's happening, and because you don't have to cast. But it adds its challenges when fighting a fish. The shorter rod is less of a buffer for margin of error. Those big steelhead you saw the photo of, those was on 6-pound leaders. So one wrong move and you're parting ways. Yeah, so that's one of the big things. But even the spinning reels you already own can adapt over. I'm at a point though where I've it's funny. I used to own just the bare minimum, and like you, I ice fished only when it was only option going when the rivers froze. And we've evolved to a point where my wife and I really look forward to ice fishing season, hoping we can get ice because I've invested in all the equipment. I always say the more ice fishing equipment I buy, the less ice we have. So maybe I need to just start selling my ice fishing equipment and bring some ice back. But yeah, if you said you ice fish out of necessity, what have you what ice fishing experiences have you had? Like bluegills on a pond, or what have you done?
Pretty much. I've ice fished Wallace Lake a couple of times.
Mhm.
I went to Mosquito a couple of times. That was crappie and walleye.
Oh
And then
yeah, great.
Wellington Reservoir. They have some yellow perch.
Yeah, those are all excellent ice fishing lakes, or can be, especially when we get ice. But yeah, bluegill is a good way to start. But the trout that Cleveland Metroparks puts in specifically in the winter, the idea is hopefully we get ice and you can ice fish. If not, you can catch them in the winter through open water or along the edge of the thinner ice where the water drops off more quickly. But yeah, your listeners will get some inside information. I'm actually stocking the first 500 pounds of trout in Wallace Lake tomorrow morning. And then we'll be doing that in more earnest and much greater quantities in more lakes the week of December 16th. So we're nowhere near safe ice yet. In fact, Wallace Lake is still almost completely open and we got warm water on the way. So you can always go pursue those through the open water. But maybe fingers crossed in a month we'll be able to get out on the hard water.
Yeah, and one thing I want to do, just like that picture there. On occasion, Rocky River will get frozen enough, and I don't want to call it safe because river ice, you constantly have that water flowing underneath, right? And then as the level of the river or even a reservoir, as that level drops, you start to have basically a void between the water and the ice. And that's where things get sketchy. Without that water supporting that ice on top, pretty easy to go through and you're not getting out. So just be careful about that.
And I will have ice fishing safety tips in my fishing report as ice fishing season sets in, if it does. So Chuck will share a link to that at some point with this. But yeah, I had a really interesting experience on the lower Rocky River years ago by the marina, where it's more sluggish and like river ice, especially where the river flows, it can be very inconsistent in its thickness. You can go from thick enough to be safe to breaking through in one step. But so avoid the upstream areas, the ice at all times. But when you've had some really consistently cold weather, if you've already had experience ice fishing, I wouldn't do this as your first experience. You can generally ice fish pretty safely if the ice is thick enough in areas like the sluggish marina area. But I was down there years ago, and it was about a foot of ice on the river. So by all accounts, that's way more than you need for safe walking. And at one point, there was this crazy loud pop and crash sound that the water level below the ice had dropped, but the ice was kind of locked in place, 12 inches of ice like a ceiling. And then at some point, just the weight of it broke free and dropped back and hit the water. It didn't break through or anybody, went through or anything, but yeah, that's an eye-opening experience. But I would tell anybody who's new to it, start with ponds, and where it's the safest places, small ponds where it sets up first, where it's the most consistent. And then you can do things like the Lower Rocky, or the Lake Erie harbors, or big lakes like Mosquito Lake. Chuck mentioned is a fantastic fishery, and it's a great ice fishing lake when we have ice. But it's also big and a little more treacherous as far as ice formation versus a small pond. So
Yeah, you could be a half mile out in the middle of the lake.
And you wonder, how do I know if the ice is 4 inches thick? The most accepted way is a heavy spud bar, pop a hole in the same spot, several hits. If it doesn't break all the way through, you've more likely to knock out 4 inches. Work your way out slowly before you drill your first hole. Then you can actually measure the ice thickness. A lot of scoops for the ice slush have inches right on them where you can tell how deep the water is. So but yeah, or just go out after you have a really extended cold spell if you're new to it, and look and see if there's other people ice fishing, and there's lots of tracks. It doesn't mean it's 100% safe, but like if you've seen there's lots of people out there already and they've been coming and going based on the tracks in the snow, you're probably safer than not. So
100%. And you can go join your local fishing group or ice fishing group on Facebook, and just make some friends. I'm not saying people are going to give you a spot, but if you make some friends, they'll invite you out, show you the ropes, and then you have somebody to have your back. Anytime you're ice fishing, you should have the buddy system. That way there's always somebody, you're protecting each other. And like Mike said, on the rivers, even for somebody like me, which is very experienced out there on a kayak, when it comes to ice fishing, there's a lot of things I don't know what I don't know. So in that situation, the only time I've ever fished on the ice on the Rocky River, and it was short-lived, I just pulled down there to look at the lake or look at the river, cabin fever. And there was a couple guys on the ice fishing. So I'm like, well, they're out there. I see a hole that's 5 foot from shore. Why not? And of course I had my safety gear, even put my dry suit on, had my my spikes and all that good stuff.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
But catching, why would you want to catch a steelhead through the ice? It's just a different experience. Like, to me, you can catch the same steelhead drifting with a float in the river with bait, fly fishing in the river, trolling in a kayak or small watercraft. Flatline trolling is always fun without any planer boards to worry about. Or ice fishing. They're all different experience, same fish, but a different experience and worth having. You may not care for it. Like me, you may really enjoy it, but something about catching that big steelhead through the ice on a little ice fishing rod is a blast. But and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be on the river. Our Lake Erie harbors, like East 50, Gordon Park's probably the most consistent one. When we've had a good ice year, and another part of that equation that's kind of weird is you never know how many bait fish are going to be around. When you go in the winter, even if the ice is thick there, and drill a hole, and there you look down and you see endless gizzard shad, the fishing's generally not going to be good. There's too much bait. It's in those years when the bait's a little harder to come by that those have been the best ice fishing years on the Lake Erie harbors. What's good for the fish is not necessarily good for the fishermen, I guess, is a way of looking at it. Right. We've caught everything from steelhead to sunfish to some nice yellow perch. One guy one year even caught a muskie in that Cleveland harbor, a 42-inch muskie. I remember that day like it was yesterday because he had just caught it. I showed up, and my friend Pat's like, he was leaving when I was coming. He goes, a guy down there just caught a muskie. I'm like, you mean a pike? Because northern pike are a lot more common there. He goes, no, it's a muskie. He kept it. He was getting it mounted, but sure enough, I got a photo, and that was one of the more unique catches. So fingers crossed that we can have that experience again this year.
Yeah, I just imagine a steelhead hitting that, that little ice fishing rod and just taking off, and you hear couple of doink as it's trying to come out of the water, bouncing off the ice.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sure that some of them have done that and bonked their head. I never remember hearing it, but what you do, a really cool experience is when the ice is really clear without snow on it, but it's thick enough. It's wild. You can watch the fish flashing, and you can see it as you fight it. It's pretty neat.
Wow.
It's just, again, it's just a unique experience, and it's part of the reason it's worth giving a try. But yep, ice fishing season. I don't know if you believe the weather forecasters, it may be just around the corner here, but I'm not going to get too excited yet. Yeah, that was when Jeremy Wade came to town for his prehistoric monsters episode a few years back, looking at Dunkleosteus, because the Rocky River Valley is really rich in fossils for that. It's kind of funny because after I did that episode, people asked, "Oh, what was he in town for? What was he fishing for?" I'm like, "Well, Dunkleosteus, it's like a fossilized shark." I had one person ask if he caught one when he was here, and they did it with a poker face, so I hope they were kidding, but it came across as serious. Said, no, he was about 10 million years too late for that.
Right. That's interesting. Well, we're about an hour in. I think before we wrap up, why don't we leave the audience with let's just talk about some local fishing opportunities for kids and the community that's coming up in 2025. And also, if there's any Cleveland Metroparks employment opportunities that you wanted to pitch and make people aware of.
Yeah, great. Well, as far as kid fishing, kid and family fishing events, there's lots of opportunities on a smaller scale. The two really big ones Cleveland Metroparks does are in the spring and the fall. We do 2 days of what we call our spring children's fishing derbies. We remove all the barriers. We have bait, we have tackle. We welcome volunteers that go through the process to help with that if you want to kind of give back to the next generation. Those are don't have the exact date set yet for that, but it's going to be second week of May-ish. And then in fall, we have Fall Family Fishing Fest in mid-October at the Ohio and Erie Canal. So, we introduce in some cases, couple hundred people newer to the sport a year to it by removing the barriers and doing that. So that's a cool opportunity. And as far as employment, Cleveland Metroparks, anything we have open is posted on our website, clevelandmetroparks.com. Search for employment. It isn't all just full-time. There's full-time, there's part-time, there's seasonal opportunities, paid. There's even volunteer opportunities. Check that out if you're interested. If you have, and of course, a biologist or a naturalist would be natural people that would gravitate to looking for a job here. But if you're an engineer or a project manager or work in the restaurant industry, Cleveland Metroparks does all those things in one form or another. So you just never know what we're hiring for, and it is a great place to work. In fact, I hire 2 what I call seasonal employees that help us with our data collection every summer. Paid positions. Generally, that's people that are either in college or recent graduates that are going that environmental conservation track, and it's a nice building block for them. But I'll have those posted. If you or if you know somebody who's kind of getting into this general field, check out the Cleveland Metroparks website as we get into early January, and you'll see not just mine, but a number of different natural resources, seasonal opportunities posted.
Yeah, and I'll drop the link in the description as well. And aside from like the community fishing events, the Cleveland Metroparks also puts on many classes for paddling and I believe paddleboarding, whitewater maybe. Like there's all kinds of different water sports that you guys offer.
Glad you brought that up. Yeah, Rachel and her team at our outdoor recreation group. They offer experiences like that for people from entry level up to, expert level kind of guided things. They're not all right here in Cleveland Metroparks. Like you said, they may go somewhere to do whitewater kayaking or whatever. But those are also under the events kind of listing on the Metroparks website. So that's worth checking out as well. And I guess one other thing, since we're talking general Metroparks resources, your smartphone app store, you just look up Cleveland Metroparks. and there's an app that it's GPS enabled. It shows if you're wading the river, you'll know if you're on public property or if you've crossed over into private land. If you have an emergency, you can send your location. Hopefully that doesn't happen. You'll know exactly where parking areas and restrooms are. Just a few of the things it can do. So Cast Cray Outdoors, thank you for the kind words. Say we do an excellent job here. They're an Ohio company that makes a whole wide range of baits. Have some of the top kind of crappie plastic baits. So give them a look. Cast Cray Outdoors, especially if you're a crappie angler.
Yep. Small company, local to Northeast Ohio. Awesome. Let's see. We have any more questions? Looks like that's it. Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we go?
I think we covered a lot. Just hope everybody gets out. Just because ice is here doesn't mean it's the end of the outdoor season. There's lots of cool, interesting experiences. Chuck pointed you towards some nice resources that can help with that. And thank everybody whoever listened in, and hope everybody has a happy holiday, however you choose to celebrate it.
And how do people reach out to you, Mike?
If you look up the Cleveland Metroparks Fishing Report, honestly, go to the Metroparks website or just type in Metroparks Fishing Report in your favorite search engine. It'll be the first thing that comes up. My contact information's in there, but I'll give you my email is my initials MD at Cleveland Metroparks. And that's just probably the easiest all around way to reach me. Could be asking when we're stocking trout. Could be asking about volunteering for a kids derby. Could be anything in between. Could be to report a water quality incident. That's actually where anglers have been my eyes and ears and super helpful over the years. Nobody knows and sees more than all of us. So, and there's a lot of people out there enjoying time in the parks. So could be just like the water has a weird foam on it or a weird odor or the color doesn't seem right. It might be a false alarm. I'd rather have you call it in and have me check it out than miss something important. Probably the most extreme example of angler calling in something that became a really big deal was in 2011. We had a small company, unfortunately, in the watershed of the Rocky River, disposed of cyanide waste improperly and illegally in a storm sewer, and it killed tens of thousands of fish. That did end up in an investigation and felony charges and $300,000 restitution to the park. I should point out that their lawyer brought that up as an offer because they knew the fine could have been up to $500,000. But we accepted that and moved on, and the river in that stretch is recovered. But it was anglers on a weekend that called in dead fish that shouldn't have been dying that time of year that were the first step in a long process to that resolution to that case. So, yep, it's another role we can all play, and never think it's too small to report. It only takes an email or phone call, and you may be making an important difference.
Absolutely. I think about a month and a half ago, I sent you a couple of pictures. It's at the end of the day, if you don't know, if you think something's up, it doesn't hurt. Just reach out to Dirk and shoot him some pictures, and hopefully it's nothing. But if it is something, maybe we catch it before it's real bad.
I'm just a biologist. I'm not the enforcement guy, authority, or whatever. But I'm somebody easy to reach out to, and I generally know the right people to funnel things to. So that's kind of the role I can play. In that other situation, we actually played an important role in the actual investigation on the ground with our understanding of our watersheds and the water resources here. But in a lot of cases, I'm just making the right people aware and letting them follow up and helping as needed. So, yep. But yeah, that's all I had, Chuck. It's great talking to you again. It's nice to be back. It's been probably a year or two at least since we've talked, and hope it's not the last time.
Oh no, I was looking back at a couple of our other podcasts, and you were the first guest on the Lake Erie Kayak Anglers podcast back in 2021, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm still getting like big royalty checks from that. I remember.
Oh yeah.
Just kidding. This is obviously unpaid.
Check
I
in
get
the
paid
mail,
in
Mike.
coffee. All right.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. We'll definitely do this again, maybe in the spring, when the fishing season's starting to kind of kick off and everybody's getting ready to get out there and, just highlight some opportunities, answer some questions.
Sounds good. And just again, because our conversation today is over, we already pointed out, reach out if you have questions that we didn't answer today or anything else myself or Chuck can answer. We're easy to find. So,
Yep.
all right. Well,
Cool.
Happy holidays to everybody, including you, Chuck.
Absolutely.
I'll see you out there on the water.
Enjoy it. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thank
Thanks
you.
for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next Thursday. Guest to be determined. 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. See you guys on the water.
Today, anglers fish longer. Today, anglers fish harder. Today, anglers rely more than ever on their electronics. It all comes down to catching more fish, and today, anglers rely on Amped Outdoors lithium batteries, period.